Welcome, everybody, back here on Segal Talks at the Martin Segal Theater Center, the greatest center CUNY in Midtown, Manhattan, part of the City University. And we are continuing our long engagement since March, since the last weeks of March, exploring that time of Corona, the place theater and arts and performance has in it. And we listen to the voices of artists and the workers in the vineyard of theater. After a break in September, we went back and enlarged a little bit our view. We had sessions already on dramaturgy, on theater of the real, documentary theater with Carol Martin. We're talking to producers, curators, and we think these are artists, theater artists in that definition of Joseph Beuys, of an enlarged understanding what we are doing, and I think what Diane Taylor always reminded us, that what is performance art has many, many roots, and what is performance art and theater and how it's created and put together also has many, many members of a team, and they're all of significance. With us today, we have someone I think is a very significant voice, an important voice, and also in a way a unique voice within the field of research of theater. Bertie Ferdman, she is here with us, and she herself is a practitioner. Started out with physical theater, if I understand and remember right, also with clowning, but then went into a field that perhaps called her more, which is the research, and also thinking about the field of theater performance, the philosophy of it, but also her true love to teach and to discuss and engage in a discourse with theater artists, but also with students and people. So here a little bit about her. Betty, first, thank you for joining us. It's great that you could take time out, even at the end of the semester. I know how hard it is. Bertie is an associate professor at the Borough Manhattan Community College, BMCC, and she also teaches at the Columbia University School of the Arts. And I hear from many people how brilliant your work there is and how influential it is. She researched on the field of site-based performance, which is an interesting word, urban dramaturgies and curating performance. The idea, who curates, who is the curator, why do they do what? So things also we, in a way, here focus on. She has some significant publication, the Bloomsbury Handbook to Performance Art. She did together with Jovana Stokic, off-sites, contemporary performance, beyond site-specific, and I think this is what we will talk about, a very significant look, I think, on that very important field that defines, in a way, contemporary theater, and also many, many other things, curating live arts, critical perspective, essays, conversational theater, on theory and practice, and she has been published in TDR, the great TDR, PAJ, wonderful one, HowlRound, actually here, and also Theater Journal, Theater Survey, everything, performance research. And currently she's working with Peter Eckersall on a book, Curating Dramaturgies, which will come out by Routledge in 21, where they talk to a big number of curators about their practice and the way what we do here to listen and to understand the form we are engaging with. So this was a lot. We always say this is about radical listening, and then I go on and on and on in the beginning. But Bertie, really, thank you for taking the time. Where are you now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be part of the Martin Segal Theater Center series. I listen to quite a few of them. Especially when we're in quarantine. And this is my kitchen.
And are you in Puerto Rico, in France?
No. Brooklyn, New York, Park Slope.
Brooklyn, New York, Park Slope. Yeah. You just told us that, that the big astronomical incident in Puerto Rico, it collapsed, right? The big...
Yes, the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, it's very sad actually. It just collapsed a few days ago. And yeah, we were talking before. My husband just texted me a photo when I was there when I was 25. It's crazy. I mean, insane that this just happened, like right now. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but it's really tragic. I think it's actually one of the biggest observatories in the world.
Yeah, it is. It was. And I think even a James Bond film was
Yes.
filmed. I know you have deep roots to Puerto Rico where your family lives, but it's also a sign that something that observed the universe collapsed. And maybe that is a good symbol to start this talk. The universe of theater and performance, what do you think of it? What is it collapse? It collapsing is completely closed here, and it will be closed perhaps till next fall. There is some news that Hugh Jackman will play the Music Man in September next year on Broadway, but nobody knows what will happen and how safe it will be. So, what are your thoughts on the theater and performance?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned, I mean, it's kind of tragic. And I was thinking, and then you mentioned Broadway, and I was thinking, I don't know that I've been kind of following the news a little bit on it, but I don't know that they're going to rebuild it, or that I'm talking about the conservatory. I don't know about Broadway, but, or that they have the money to rebuild it or to maintain it the way it was. And I guess that's what you mean by a good metaphor for the theatrical landscape, because I guess we're going to have to rebuild from the ground up, and I don't know where the money is going to come from or what kind of institutional frameworks they're going to create to sustain a theater, in the ways that people want to have, I guess, theater, because it's been kind of imposed on us for a while. So yeah, I guess artists are going to have to reinvent. We talk about that in my Columbia class a lot, and I think, wow, we have a great future in our hands with them. They think about these things all the time. So I think you're right. We are in a historic moment, and we're going to see a lot of changes. We're not going to go back to what was. Artists are going to rethink what to do and how to do it, and with whom and for whom, and yeah.
What do you think? What will be the changes? What will we see?
Well, maybe I can start by telling you what I saw this morning. It's a big question. I was just this morning, I wake up very early, and I don't know why I don't often do this, but I watched Bibi Telas. She's an Argentine director doing biodrama, and they were supposed to premiere Blood Wedding, Bodas de Sangre, with Cecilia Roth, and a very kind of famous ensemble. I think it was back in, I don't remember, a few months ago, and obviously they couldn't do it, so they came up with, I don't know how they quarantined the actors, but they're doing it in 3 parts, and it was incredible. It wasn't film, but it wasn't theater. It was something that they did on their own on the stage that was very, very intimate, and yet it's recorded. We can all watch it. So I watched it because I want to see it live. The part 2 is coming out. I think it's Saturday, tomorrow. Today, Friday, yeah. So I wanted to make sure I saw part 1, and going back to your bigger question about what it's going to be, I just think that people are going to have to use the what's available to them, and they're going to have to go off-site. They're going to have to use theaters in new ways, use spaces in new ways, engage with their own communities, and find ways of being more human, even through technology. It was incredibly human, this performance. Yeah, it was very honest. It's funny, there's nothing fake about it, which is, well, I don't know how much you want me to talk, but I was paying attention to the way they were performing on camera in this bare stage with nobody around, and they were talking about real events of their lives that were quite tragic, and it was a performance of the real. We were talking about this before, about the kind of the authenticity. So I think maybe it's a time for things to be more authentic, through performance, through spectacle, actually.
Hmm. Yeah, that somehow our radar of detecting what's real, what's not, what is essential, what's important is being, it's going to be function on a better software. Your book Offsites,
Mhm.
in a way, dealt and looked at that field in a way you anticipated. Perhaps one could even say, this field, what is now being practiced by. We've talked over 100 theater artists, and 150 actually, 180, and the production that were done in a way would fall most probably under your category, what you created, that idea of the off-site. Tell us a little bit, what is that, and why do you think this is important? Why should we read your book?
Well, I don't know if you, I mean, I don't know if you should or shouldn't read my book, but I definitely think that the notion of offsites, it's incredibly important to the history of theater and performance. I mean, first of all, theater with a capital T is an invented notion that comes from Western settler colonialism, that kind of stems from the history of European theater as they created it and kind of settled it around the world. And that's not the notion of performance at all, as it was invented by humans. I mean, the notion of storytelling, embodiment, and celebration and being together has been going on since Homo sapiens existed, and it's always been done off-site. There's no building, proscenium stage, fourth wall. The notion of wanting to engage with others in an authentic human way is a human need, and the artists for so long, of course I am in the book, I'm engaging with the notion of site specificity. So I'm engaging with it through histories of visual art discourse, which come from minimalist art, because they're so obsessed with the autonomous realm of the artwork being separate from reality. And then that, kind of gets all enmeshed with minimalist sculpture, when you have to have the spectator kind of interact with that work. And then coming from theater, where artists for so long have been doing things, of course, outside of theater buildings, but also engaging with real life, with new ways of viewing, seeing, spectating, not necessarily having a separation. I mean, and just in this century, thinking about invisible theater, Boalian notions of spect-actorship or spect-participation. And so the notion of offsites, it's not really new. It's it's ways that artists want to engage with authentic ways of being in community, not necessarily always architectural, although that might be a component, but not always. And you were asking me, I think, I don't want to miss the last part of the question. I think you were asking me about the term. Offsites simply has to do, because I've seen so many performances that happen to be outside of theaters, but they're all super, super different. And so I was trying to understand how were artists doing it? It wasn't just that I want to go see a show in a hotel and I don't know, there's a show in a hotel. It could very well be that there's different forms of engagement. And so or somebody was, creating a new way of merging reality, real life with actors, with fiction. And those worlds would blend. So I was looking really at, all these different approaches to site specificity, what you were saying in the beginning about site-based. So the term off was kind of like, oh, I'm so off it, I'm off site, I'm so done. But really it's more about an offness, where the term off-site is like, oh, guys, I'm going to work off-site. And that's really actually relevant to today, where we're always off-site, but we're always on. We can never so it's kind of a conundrum between being here and there at the same time. I say this in the intro to the book. My family are immigrants, or for example, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My family's from Argentina. I live in America, in the US. So I'm never quite whole. I'm always here and there at the same time. And that's really something I saw throughout the pieces I was seeing, how artists were engaging with space, place, and its historical and socio-political context, but at the same time, wanting to kind of unveil something that's hidden. So it's like that here and there at the same time, a notion of like never quite a whole, always incomplete. To answer
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think with so many artists or curators, producers, we talked when we say, you know, what is changing? What are we focusing on? And I think there is that turn to that authenticity, that theater of the real. There is the audience participation in that kind of socially engaged art, but there also was the work people point out the relation to community and to the places, the spaces outside what we would call the black box, the Italian style theater. Milo Rao said, my idea for this fall is, and this in the coming spring, let's not do anything inside the theater. Um, so, what examples have you watched? We say this is an interesting way. Of course, it's a multiplicity of engagements, but maybe tell us a bit about productions and you have seen or you have looked at. You feel this they found something.
um, well, I could think of a couple. I just before I give examples, just to kind of expand on what you were saying about going outside of theater, because I think engagement is a really important part of it. Once you, let me just backtrack a little bit. In theater, you have the proscenium at the stage, and I'll give a few examples in a second, but that's kind of our frame that we work in, and you can control that. And that's the same with what we might call in visual art the painting, where you frame it and it's plot, and the objective is to kind of get rid of everything else. It's very anti-Brechtian, right? You're like hiding everything that's behind. And so that's where Brecht came in. He wanted to kind of unveil the apparatus that was making that function, as what was happening with the incursion of the spectatorship, engaging with sculpture, let's just say in visual art history. So the second that you want to do work outside the theater or engage the space or audiences differently in the way that's been kind of bogged down to us with a capital T, you are by definition creating different systems of support and engagement. You're engaging with, let's just say, the real and different levels of production by definition. Because if I want to go, or if an artist, let's say, wants to go do a piece in my home, I have to talk to my neighbors. I have to, I have to rethink if I'm even going to charge tickets. Like, am I going to bother the neighbor upstairs? And, that's going to be all part of the conversation. And so I should probably just say it. I went to see a show many years ago, and the show was a controlled thing. They wanted to do a theater in the apartment. And it was something about memory, and I can't quite remember exactly the name of the company, but they wanted the show is like, once you open the door, there are the actors in the kitchen, and the actor goes to the bathroom, and so you follow, it's very private, intimate space, only 5 spectators at a time. But what ended up happening is that those artists didn't take into account the fact that this happened in a co-op building in New York City. And so how were you going to get, you couldn't really tell the neighbors. It was like this whole thing that had to be, let's just say, hidden. So that's the real, right? Infiltrating the fiction. And so then what happens is that, people were kind of sitting in the lobby, and then other residents complained, and what ended up happening is that the guard who happened to work in the building got in trouble. And so there's real repercussions to, this kind of autonomous realm of the artwork that should, I think, become part of the work. So production is not a separate realm. It should be part of the aesthetics. And you were asking me, I think the second part of your question was, to give examples of things I've seen. So sure, I mean, I can think of, I guess, 2 off the top of my head. Like a few years, I think it was 2018, I was in Bahia, Brazil, FIAC. It's an international theater festival, and they had invited, Rimini Protocol did a piece that they've done around the world. I don't love all their pieces, but this one was amazing, Home Visit. and they had developed a game tailored to every location that would be performed, because it wasn't really, I mean, it was a game. They created a situation. And this is the notion about offsites. It's not always a performance, a show. It's sometimes an orchestration of a situation, a way of having a conversation. And this was a game about capitalism in Bahia, and it was at a person's house. So the host of that really home would invite us to their home, and we would play a game that was quite orchestrated through the dramaturgy that Remaining Protocol had set up. And I think they've recorded, they did like a map of all the answers to the questions based on, real people, I guess, participants' notions of what that game was. That's one example. And of course, there's, I love the work of John Malpede and LAPD, Los Angeles Poverty Department, who's been doing incredible work using artists that have lost their homes, and they've done pieces around the notion of drugs and narcotics. They've done a work called RFK and EKY, which was a reenactment of Robert Kennedy's poverty tour right before the Bush election. I could go on, but that was something where their engagement was for many years. The show is not just a simple actual show. It's a whole process of being on site to talk about like a historical moment in order to talk about the future.
Hmm. So it's a radically different engagement with the idea of theater. When we now think, when will theater reopen? When will the off-Broadway and off, where we present the great plays of the world? Would you say, wait a minute, think through what are you doing, and is that a moment to perhaps present work that doesn't need all these spaces?
Yes. The first thing that came to my mind when you made that comment is I'm thinking about my students that are playwrights, and how they're thinking about what writing is for the theater, because now for the theater doesn't necessarily mean on a stage in a proscenium. It could be through some technology, it now involves different forms of technology. It could be in different spaces occurring at the same time. So the idea of writing plays for a proscenium is definitely changing. Just even in the notion of play itself, they are incorporating this off-sidedness all the time. You could write a play that occurs in different locations at the same time. You could write a play that engages with that has different forms of engagement, or that distributes itself through different medium, for example. I don't know if I'm being too abstract.
No. I think also for theater companies or theater artists listening now, I think that idea of the offsite, of course, is something in COVID, that is actually working and possible. We just had, the Cherry Arts Project, and they said, yeah, we did our play, a Goldoni, kind of unknown one. We did it, of course, outside, not in our space, and they adapted masks, surgical mask for your Comedia mask, and else, but they did it in a way, engaged, I think, with the housing departments where they played it and the community and so it was, if I understand, quite popular. Would you say to theater artists now that this is a form, so what you wrote about, of course, before Corona, but this is a form that actually can successfully be adapted and should be taken serious? So don't wait till you get back in the black box. Use a form that has been proven of interest, to scholars in the field and theater artists.
Yes, we talk again. Yes. So all the time, it's this. If you are taking for granted that theater, means this, and you don't question the form, then we're going to be stuck with the same thing all the time. But that's the beauty of art, is that it's not just about the content, it's about the form. And so, why do do you need an audience member? How many do you need? Where do they have to be? How are you going to engage with them? Um, you know, and that question of where they have to be is very important. You could be in many places at the same time now, which has to do with distribution of your, it could be filmed or not filmed. I mean, I'm going like this because you're far away and I'm here. So in other words, the thinking about the theater is what you're saying about Milorá, like it's really a whole event. It's about dramaturgy is now implicated into the event of theater. So questioning every single facet of that is very important, which just in architecture is just one part of it, because the notion of sightedness is not just physical, like I'm at this site working. It can involve a conversation. It can be a discursive site that you're interested in. It can be something you experience. So sometimes, this is just for example, sometimes I would go to see a show that happens, I don't know, outside in a sidewalk, but it's not so much the sidewalk that's important. It could be, sure, related to the history of the space, but very often it happened to be outside because the artist was more interested in a conversation that related to that community. They wanted to stage a situation that engaged people of that community to have a conversation, for example. So to go back to your question about theater and artists, yes, it's a whole event. I remember being at a panel a long time ago on at APAP of all places. I think Philip Byther was talking about curating. I think it was a panel with like Ralph Lemon and Wesleyan has a program. I don't know if it still exists. That's called, I think it does. It's called something about curating performance, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the people in the room were artistic directors of repertory theaters. And Philip Byther was who's a curator at Performance at the Walker Art Center, was trying to kind of share that, share that, we can get out of this booking a season philosophy. Why not have one show all year that's durational in time? Or, why not, like the national, I mean, he wasn't saying it, but for example, National Theatre of Scotland is a theatre without walls. So was the Foundry, by the way, they just finished with their last project, which was a book. That's one of their projects. So that you can found a theater, of course, without walls, and that will get you to think otherwise. Or Big At Theater, directed by Eric Alada. I mean, they based in the south of France, for example, their projects are not based, just like Foundry. It's not like we're going to do this show in this theater. They start with an idea and then it develops. It could be a video. It could be a walk. They do a lot of audio walks. So it depends on the idea that the artist wants to do, but theater can exist anywhere.
Mm. And in a way, it has a closeness in a way to the visual arts, right? As part of the home for offsite, or would you say that?
Well, I think what's okay. Well, since you're mentioning visual art, I think there's good and bad things in terms of the visual arts. I think what they have encouraged historically is both much more of engagement with theory, and artists thinking theoretically or abstractly about what art is. So in their work, and so that has shaped, conceptual art, institutional critique, social practice-based works, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, I think we're at a wonderful advantage in the theater part of it, because our work is people-based, it is communal-based, it is social practice by definition. So all these kind of new forms, and I say new because, you know, in the visual arts, whether they call it ephemeral practices or, you know, that's what we're good at. So yes, I think a lot of the most interesting artists, and the ones I write about in the book, are engaging with kind of a mixture of both, and looking at using the theatrical practices they have very well through new conceptual frameworks.
Let's say the living theaters, street performances, Bread and Puppet, or Shackner did work, I think, also in the diner. The Worcester did work outside, and so. Do you detect? Is there something in the 21st century? Is there something that changed, or is it a continuation of it? Is something new happening in that field? You look at it, the offsites. Is there something that has changed compared to the traditional avant-garde in that sense?
So offsites is simply the terminology I use to engage with site-based practices. But yes, site-based practices have changed a lot especially since the 80s. That's the first time I kind of heard it. I think historically in theater, that's the first time the term was used. I heard it. I mean, I was going to say in the UK, it was perhaps used a little earlier, but the term used to kind of be environmental theater, and then on-garde arts, Annie Hamburger started using the term, probably because she comes from a visual arts background. But it used to be Meredith Monk, and a lot of people in dance. We should mention that a lot of this has been going on with dance for quite a while. Charles Mee was writing plays, you know, that were site-specific to be directed. Yes, absolutely. The 21st century changed. It used to be kind of large-scale pieces where you would, where artists were interested in staging things, as you were saying, outside of theaters as a production, where people could have access, I guess, to places that were closed or abandoned, and they tended to be large scale. Reza Abdo is very important here in this history, who staged along with on-garde arts. Father was a Peculiar Man in the 90s. So that was, you know, big then. And absolutely, we've gone through right now, especially in the last 10 years, kind of more intimate performances, no sets, using, I mean, for lack of a better word, like the real life. So for example, I saw a piece by Big At Theater, directed by Eric Lata, that was Hidden Stories, where you kind of followed it. It was not long ago here, but it was created a while back, and I saw it not in Fort Greene, downtown Brooklyn, where I think there were like 5 actors, and you put on headphones and you individually kind of observed the inner world of these performers, and they would go. Anybody else in the neighborhood wouldn't know that a performance was going on, because they just kind of blended in unless you had the headphones. I hope you're understanding what I'm trying to say. And the other one was Anne Hampton's. Well, also Rotozaza that the Foundry produced in a cafe. And Anne Hampton did the library piece. I think PS 122 produced that in a library. So actually, the library one is a really good example of, it was just 2 audience members at a time. You would go to a library, they would give you a headphone, and they go through this kind of staging of books by yourself, and the library becomes your stage, and it's a form of invisible theater. Nobody else, you're in a show, there's no actors, you're your own performer. And so I hope you're seeing, so the shift went from kind of experimental staging practices to more experiential situations created by the artists. Yeah, that are sometimes more invisible, and more of an infiltration of the real and fiction in that sense. So, and in that sense, since you mentioned visual art, I think that there was much more of an engagement or fluidity between what was going on in the visual arts and what was going on theatrically.
I mean, you make a clear distinction between site-specific and off-site. Maybe tell us a little bit why you felt it needed an update, that field or the term for it.
So, okay, I just want to make it clear, I'm not like categorizing something as off-site or not off-site. I was simply using the approach off-site, being here and there at the same time, like introducing a kind of offness to contemporary practices that move beyond the site specific. So whereas before, and Robert Smithson from Visual Art talks about this difference, and we can maybe have more specific examples. Richard Serra, the famous tilted artwork that happened in Lower Manhattan, that was site specific, right? If you move the work, you would destroy it. But we've gone much more than that. Even visual arts, you can have site-based work that tours, and it's the artist that travels, or you have pieces that are made locally at different places. So the notion of sightedness went from being very grounded. Mi Won Kwon talks about this in Visual Art History. Her book is precisely about that, but coming from visual arts. And in theater, so we go from site specificity to site-based practices but again, that don't prioritize location or architecture necessarily as the most important part. So to give you an example, I'm going back to John Malpede, who did the piece RFK and EKY. Yes, LAPD had to do that piece. In Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, RFK, EKY, right? Because that's where, but, and of course it's site specific because you cannot not do it anywhere else. But the engagement, the participatory element, the durational component, the way you engage with the piece, those are just as important, if not more. And the off-sightedness, in that chapter, I just talk about temporalities, the notion of time, because by using that site, he's bringing us to an off time, like engaging with a different time in order to move forward. So playing that, I'm just using the word off-sites as a way to kind of recognize the varied approaches that artists are using when they're engaging with site in this conceptual way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a big contribution. And by the way, John Malpede is the brother of Karen Malpede, the playwright. Quite a theatrical family. Yes, I really admired also the work for decades, what they have done, and work, highlighting, the complex history of immigration and the political fights for civil rights, and how they were able to they recreated the march, right? It had some actors representing Kennedy, but also civil rights, and they went through the landscape, through the towns, and when it comes to validation, I think with plays there are the Tonys, there are the Obies, and this and that. This is what we've been taught and what people achieve for. In the off-site world, I think it's more complicated, right? It doesn't have a real footing, or even now in academia. I think you're one of the very few writing about it. There are of course others, but also in producing, I know Andrew Kircher, who is also studied at the Graduate Center and was hired at the Public Theater because they found out we know how to produce a play, but they had no idea how to produce, something that's off the site. And a Rimini Protocol came to the Brooklyn Public Library for the Under the Radar, and they thought, oh, they have Wi-Fi at the library. Of course, that's fine. We can chat to it. And Rimini said, no, this is not professional. Of course, this will not work. And also, there were complications with it. So, so that whole field is complicated in a way, and that's perhaps why it is not as much in the center as it should be. Do you think? that from observing the field, is it a wave that's going away? Do you think we will see more work, especially now in COVID time, or do you think it will not gain as strong a foothold, perhaps, as the forms of theater we are traditionally look at?
Okay, so the short answer to your question is yes, it's gonna only get bigger. Yes, I think theaters with a capital T, I don't know, Lincoln Center. I mean, St. Anne's Warehouse has been, engaging with this, but BAM actually the engage a lot with offsite performance, but more and more theaters will have to go out and look for new, not only new spaces, because new spaces by definition, when an artist engages with new spaces, they're engaging with new forms of theater. So it's just going to get bigger and bigger, not in scale, I mean in the amount of artists looking for new ways of engaging with theater practice. And yeah, institutions are going to have to accommodate and therefore change their producing dramaturgies or the way they produce. It goes hand in hand. Aesthetics and production are not, again, separate things, as Annie Hamburger has kind of shown through Hunger Arts, or even Melanie Joseph through the Foundry Theater. But what's important about your question, besides the fact that yes, this is just going to get more, I don't know, bigger, yeah, more artists are going to engage more with this kind of work, is that questioning more what theater with a capital T is and inventing new forms. And by the way, as Cantor said, you have to get out of theater in order to make theater, or invent new forms of theater. Sometimes you have to kind of get out of the medium in order to discover what it is, to see it or look at it differently from a different angle. But this is going to have a huge impact. And this is why I got into writing about curating and producing, because especially with curating practices, and going back to what I said before about, you can't just like think of it like, oh, I'm going to book my season, this play, then this play, then this play. You have to shift the way that what events are and who they're for and who are you inviting, it's not, and this actually has to do with the diversity question and the whole notion of rethinking our institutions and who they're for, because it's not about bringing this diverse Black playwright into your company. You have to reshift, like, who is the institution really representing? It's not fixing a thing with a band-aid. You have to like heal from the inside, from, you know what I'm saying? And so this is that moment. Corona is gonna have to do that, because it has shown, for lack of a better word, like how unequal, and unsustainable the system is.
Mm-hmm. And
short answer to your question.
And also not functioning, right? The big houses are closed. They're not set up. If they were set up with an arm for off-site work, what we call it, they would be still being out there producing in the parks, on the street, like in small units, right?
Well, I mean, I think that the artists are not going to wait for institutions to produce them. I think that the artists are creating new ways to do work, and if they're going to be their own institutions, it's going to be from the ground up. There's going to be grassroots movements that are building up, and those established, or I guess formally established institutions, are going to have to, it's going to be something like this. They're going to have to not impose, but see, what people are building from the DIY movement to kind of shift their producing models. We can't just have artistic directors who are there for 20, 30 years. We need new blood every few years. It doesn't, and it doesn't have to be vertical, it can be horizontal. I mentioned National Theatre of
Scotland.
Yes, before. That is an institution that has always been horizontal, meaning equal partnerships, equal authorial control over. It's not like one person picking, not a star curator or a star artistic. That's old. That's not going to be the
They
new.
also decided not to have a space. They said
Not to
for
have
the
it.
entire land of Scotland. We go everywhere. We go in existing places, also
I was just looking.
Glasgow, Edinburgh, who should get it? They said, no, we are mobile. It's an incredible conceptual and run by artists and created by artists, and actually not through a government structure of the city.
Really has a say in what they want. That's the thing. They're it's not like I'm commissioning this artist to do, some idea. It's like, what does the community need? What do they, I mean, not what they, what are they asking for? And not subscribers, not
Mhm.
that whole model. I'm not sure how long that's going to last.
Yeah, no, it's a great model, and but I think offsites, of course, is something in this time of Corona. I think already it was, I think, a very significant field, but I hope it will also get more attention. Also, the significance of it as an artistic expression, as you said, authentic way to engage with the creation of meaning for the artist, but also for the audiences. It has something that. Is unique and powerful, and perhaps like theater of the real, the entrance of the spectator, the normal person, the expert of the everyday, as Romani says, into theater productions, but also then the notion of the off side that happens to be perhaps also outside, but it's not defined by the space. It is more an experience, often more intimate, as you said, of a moment of life and a moment of deep reflection that perhaps helps us to look in a different way
I mean,
at
I
life.
think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, no, go on.
No, that you mentioned a word that I think is really crucial, and it's what experience, I guess, as artists, do we want to, create? So it goes back to that notion of content. I'm thinking back to Phil Soltanoff, an artist I worked with. I had the opportunity to work with so many years ago, but I really, really admire his work. Um, and yes, he was doing things or engaging with spaces that perhaps were not in theater, but more than that, it's that he was looking for new ways to experience or to create an event for the audience, for the performer, um, you know, like questioning again the form, um, uh, not to take it for granted. Um, and,
Hmm.
and yeah, always in ways that were integral to what he was researching in the work.
Yeah, no, it's a great. If I not mix up, I remember his piece. I think it was in the parking lot where he taped a square, and performers and actors were standing outside, almost like in a soccer game, where you say, you have this is the white line. If you're sitting on the bench, even as a great player, you don't do anything. But you get into the game, you step over that white line. You are in the game. You perform. You do things, and then it's over. And he did this, I think, in a parking lot, and then people who stepped into it and over it danced were dancers, and it wasn't clear who. If I'm, yeah,
In 5 miles, I think it was Peter. Well, not what was it called? Not the hour. Forget the name of it now. The
but
hour.
it's a great concept. My question is, Patty, in the time of Corona, do you think? We talked about this also here that theaters often have ballet, drama, opera. We said we wonder, will there be the digital division? Theaters in Germany now hire digital dramaturgs. I think we spoke with someone from Augsburg. That's her job. She's a dramaturg just for the digital new department they are creating, because they say it's here, it's going to stay. Who knows if the next Corona comes or not? But we're going to engage in that art. Do you think that theaters, instead of letting the artists doing themselves, shouldn't institutions host artists, open the space? I mean, Helen Shaw yesterday said, what I hope for is that big institutions will open for artists, for small institutions, open the space. They do what you want, we help you. Do you think that movement will come, as you said, independently, or do you think there has to be a serious support from existing institutions to this art form, which is contemporary, which is new, which is emerging, and of significance because it has to do with our times?
Oh yeah, that reminds me. Yes, but what you're talking about, I think, has to do with funding, perhaps, or uh, indirectly, which is something I had forgot to mention in the question before about Sure. With institutions or established institutions, what comes is, you know, funding, and one of the issues that we have, and I'll answer your question about yes, because I think they have to open their spaces and think, you know, wider and bigger conceptually. But it's also when we, because you had mentioned OBs and awards and Tonys, the categories of awards that we have are incredibly outdated.
Yeah.
um, the Because they're so compartmentalized about, you know, what a theater, who a theater artist is, that they don't take into account in their interdisciplinarity of what contemporary theater has become. And that has to do also with the judges, um, you know, who are hired for the, or whatever, or who represent, you know, whether they're playwrights or not. Or, I mean, I've been in panels where I'm the only theater person and everybody else comes from visual art, and unless that um, artist is, you know, challenging theater forms, they're not going to get funded or awarded, and vice versa. I've also been in panels where the other panelists were very classically trained, or coming from very literary drama notions of theater. And so, for example, if you weren't an amazing playwright and you were a performer, you weren't going to get the award. So the categories are some things that we're going to have to play around with. Just as, yes, institutions, I think that to your question about uh, how we're going to see a shift in theater, I guess, I mean, I don't know in Broadway, because it's all going to depend on economically how their needs. Commercial theater and non-commercial theater works very differently, but ultimately it has to do with how open you want to be with funding. And, you know, are we still going to have, you know, the Broadway and then Creative Capital, and, you know, it's almost so predictable. So something's got to shift, because I think, even I see the new artists, they're you know, the younger generation, they're not going to be, you know, um, playing the game the same way. They're going to change it. They're going to change the game.
Hmm.
So I don't know
Yeah.
if that answers your question.
No, it's true. I think it has to change, and also it will change. And we are maybe already it has changed. It's not visible yet. And I think your book, The Offsites, is, you know, shows us a little bit some rules of the game, or shows us the map on where those games could take place, with lots of areas also then to discover. So I think it is really a significant thought that these times where you cannot get into the space and the suffering, there are other possibilities. And as you said, companies like the Foundry, LAPD, and Los Angeles and others, you know, have said, even in the time, in the supposedly good times, say, no, we don't want that space. You know, it's like Man Ray, the great artist, also conceptual artist, who was a great landscape painter, but when he started out, but he said, no, it's no longer an appropriate expression of the time I live in, where we have, you know, radio, phonograph, typewriters. We had at that time cars, airplanes. He said, you know, we have to be different, and he moved, you know, into the solarization and installation and the abstract art as an expression that is connected to the time. And I think this is, after all, what art has to be doing. It has to help us to create meaning, and in a way prepare us also for all the changes and make us comfortable with it, and see what is good about it, what hasn't been there before, while of course also preserving existing forms. But so yeah, so really thank you for your work. I encourage everybody to also check out what you're doing. I hear also in the Corona time you had some activities that were not connected fully to theater as in the business idea. If I can ask you, is that true?
Yes. So this is because Frank and I are friends outside of the Martin Segal. With my girlfriends, we started um, we, a mezcal brand, where, of course, everybody's a little bit into drinking. So uh, uh, two of my friends are from Mexico, and one has been to Oaxaca quite a few times. So if you're a mezcal lover, we'll see if it comes to fruition. But the idea is to start a small label of mezcal with women palenqueras. Palenqueras are the ones that make the mezcal. So also kind of a new way of creating a mezcal brand, where part of the proceeds go to the families who produce them. Yes.
And who knows, one day you might come up where that offsite
The offsite mezcal.
experience is connected to Mezcal that, if I remember right, has some kind of psychedelic, tiniest bit of psychedelic additions maybe in it, and it is very different. So that's quite interesting. But also it shows, as you say, the idea of the experience in the loneliness which we experience now, and the solitude, and also that perhaps there is something to experience, and something like connects us to an inner world, and we look so much. Everything comes from the outside world relentlessly, and I think we need to connect to our inner worlds. And I think actually that kind of offside really does, especially as you said, in the experiences of the walk around the audio tour, the being alone but among others, so questioning reality, but having a dialogue in a way also then with yourself, where you are the performer. It's a radical difference than
Well,
being the consumer.
yeah, and since you mentioned digital, I think it was La Jolla Playhouse. They have like a site-specific festival, and they had to change because of Corona, of course, because of the lockdown. We couldn't even go anywhere outside. Um, but Marike um, Splint did this fantastic performance all online live called "You Are Here" that I believe is still accessible. Even though I saw it live online, the way she engaged with Google Maps and the digital sphere, it was very site specific to the condition that we're living in. Um,
Hmm.
that,
Yeah, so no, I really do think that that is a very significant outcome, and I would encourage everybody who creates theater and performance, to really think about this form, especially in the upcoming year. We need, there's a thirst, a hunger, a necessity, as for me and many others, to see work, engage with it, to have this kind of, someone said the word apocalypsis. Calypsis really means revelation in the original meaning of the divine on the earth, or something, that we take the lid of something. So to reveal to us also the mysteries and the miracles of life, as John Cage said about his art. And this is a way, instead of, not doing anything, or if you are run a theater, you have funds, instead of saying we cannot do anything in our theater, this is a way to employ artists, to engage an audience, and to really experiment and find a new form that perhaps might, as you said, inform the practice itself. You have to go outside sometimes in a form, and then you return to it. This is a moment, and there are possibilities, and it's great work really has been done, and by all these artists, David Levine and Marina Abramovic, and so many others who worked in that field. Maud LeFloc, and I don't know if you have other names. What people should look at. Are there other artists you feel look at their work?
well, like I Marika Splint's piece "You Are Here" is fantastic. Yeah, sure. David Levine was doing work before. I'm not sure what he's working in
Not
now.
at the moment, but in the parks, yeah, where he did before. Puppetry, I think, also there. This the Gulliver's Travel, that great company.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, who did gigantic performances, in a way, on the streets. And why not do something what people in their homes from their windows can watch? Maybe they don't even have to be on the street.
Antigone and Ferguson, I saw that also via Zoom. That was quite powerful. I mean, the way they're reinventing the notion of sightedness via the Zoom mechanism, that was quite engaging.
Who was that? What
Working
company?
theater.
Oh, Working Theatre.
Yeah.
So I know that Offsites already is a couple of years. When did you write? 2 years ago it came out?
It came out in 2018.
18, yeah, 2 years. Wow, how
There's probably much more updated artists.
yeah, yeah. I think you should keep it updated. I think it's a significant field, and it should be taught. It should be produced. There should be the Obie Award for best offside work, and the Tony and whatever, and the Oscar. But what are you working on now? What are you looking at? What are you doing?
I'm shifting gears, but I think it's related because I'm always fascinated about how the art infiltrates the real and vice versa. So, been now shifted to looking at vulnerabilities and precarity within theater, and specifically like actor training and playing also in children. Why is something, uh, how is opening up to vulnerability provide a new form of presence or authenticity? So it's totally new, but it's around the notion of vulnerability and precarity in performance, whether it be through actors or playing or the performance or engagement of,
Mm.
of a space.
And how is that connected to offsite? You said it's
It's
connected.
not necessarily. Oh, it's only connected indirectly in what my interests around theater are, because I'm always interested in when fiction and real, when they kind of, when you don't have a separation between art and life. So they're both connected, but it's not really. It's a totally different project.
The different construction site, even though you have experience from the other. I mean, coming close to the end of the talk, we always ask that twofold. One is, what would you say? What do you say to your young students now? What should they be doing next year? What should theater artists be doing? I really would like to hear from you. And then, what are you reading or listening to? What inspires you at the moment?
What the first question is, what should they be?
What should theater artists do?
Oh,
Young artists or
oh,
mid-career people who cannot work or at home. What do you think?
they
What's your practical advice? What do you say? What do you do? You also run a company, right?
they should ask big questions. They should ask questions, question everything, and that gets you to thinking differently about how you're engaging with the form. So I would say constantly ask yourself what's challenging now, and work through questions around that, and that's gonna, get you no work, no pain, no gain. Like, go get through the hard spots, and that's gonna make your art much stronger. Um, and the second one was I happen to be reading, I don't know the full title, but it's Love by Bell Hooks. It's about, it's kind of an older book. I think it's 10 years old. It's really beautiful. I'm halfway through. It's about the lack of love in our contemporary culture.
Okay,
Beautiful.
good. So, well, Bertie, thank you so much. And I'm sorry we pushed you to come on our show in the middle of your crazy sprint at the end of the semester, but I felt it is such an important and significant contribution, and we should have much more. Perhaps also we could make maybe a series a week, with international artists who work in that field and listen to them and hear what they are doing, how they are doing it, and why. But it is certainly a form that is valuable and also possible. And in that time we live in at the moment, it has some answers. It has found something in it. But as you said, it has a very, very long tradition. It's morphing, of course, into different contexts, forms, and shapes. But it is something that is possible, doable, and also, I think, necessary at the moment. So thank you for highlighting it with us. Thank you for writing the book and for researching and giving attention to the field, and that you also did this. I know there are so many dissertation things about the contemporary American playwrights and Kushner, and you've said, no, I'm going to work on that. That is important, and you focused on that very early on, and I think it proved to be of significance and importance. So really, thank you. Thanks for
having me.
HowlRound, yeah, for hosting us, and we're going to see all of you next week, and have a great weekend, and yeah, think about the next book on OffSite. Updated in a couple of years from now, and I think it's an important field. So thank you so much, and hope you all will stay safe. It's, as we know, it's a devastating moments, up to 3,000 people dying each day. It's disastrous, but it really, in time, also to really think, as Bertie said, question everything. What are we doing and why? And it is an important time. We have Alejo Gantner with us next week, who will talk about producing, creating. He did the great PS 122 stint with the Onassis Foundation. And then we have Hilary Miller, who will talk with us about the time when New York City also experienced a terrible time in the city. It was devastating, it was bankrupt, and perhaps when we look around in Midtown, it is a similar moment. And then we have Martine K. Green with us, and Ken Janiglia from LMDA, the Literary Manager and Dramaturgies Association of New York. of the Americas, and we will hear about their work, what is going on, and also they did a lot of outreach to Mexico and the work in dramaturgs in this field, where your discourse also really matters so much when it comes to curation and the offsites and really looking at the structures of theater. And as you said, we cannot forget what Brecht said and Hannah Müller. Theater itself represents as government, a structure, the powers at be, and we also have to be critical of it, or at least be aware of it, and not just feeding the machine, but also questioning it. And then if we do this, as Hannah Müller said, without criticizing it, it's treason to the original idea of theater and the performance, where we work through problems as complex issues in society, in our lives, in our families, in our communities. So it is actually of, I think, essential importance. So thank you all. Sorry if I talk too much today, because I'm very passionate about this field. Also, it's an important one, and I hope this was a contribution to also highlight it. Thank you so much, Bertie, and
Frank. Thank you.